Hello, community, and welcome back to another Keeping It Real with Dr. Nita podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nita Polite Wilson, C Suite Trusted Advisor, Board Director, and Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Strategy Consultant, helping members of the C Suite and their teams reframe diversity conversations from difficult to different. I am so delighted to have back with me as my guest for this Thanksgiving series of Real Conversations from the C Suite, Miss Jasmine Bellamy, Head Merchant and Culture Transformer at Reebok. And she is recognized by Sports Illustrated as among the top 100 influential Black women in sports. Jasmine, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you.
So, in our last conversation, we talked about love and how important that is in the workplace. And we looked at how you define that word love, with the L being listen and look, the O being open-minded, open-hearted, open to change, the V being value others and vulnerability, and the E being emotional well-being and expansive. I want to go back to the vulnerability because leaders in the workplace today still feel like leadership automatically means that I have to have all the answers. But to be vulnerable is not the same as being weak. As a matter of fact, I have looked up the word vulnerability, and it really requires bravery and courage to be vulnerable. So, what I want to explore this time is I see that you approach the work of culture transformation by leading through tough conversations, and I approach it by reframing diversity conversations from difficult to different. When you talk about leaders needing to be vulnerable, that can be a tough conversation for some leaders to wrap their mind around. Tell us how you do that.
Yeah. I think if I go back to what we said in the first episode about having a posture of love,
Mhm.
I think that is a place to begin. And I also mentioned the shift from head to heart. I also have to name my privilege. I've been in the business industry for over 30 years. I have 2 master's degrees. Um, you know, I've been around. So I've been in the season where my work was very tactical and I had to get some things done, right? And you had to acquire knowledge to be able to grow. So I acknowledge all of that as a part of the building blocks to get to leadership at a senior level. What I have learned, though, particularly in this season with my team, is they there's a level of strategic strength and wisdom that I bring to my role at this part of my career. And there is a tactical expertise, the details that they bring to a conversation. And both of those things are really valuable.
Mhm.
And so I remember taking my Strength Finders test
Yes.
back in 2020. And one of the things that I learned about myself is that I do have an ability to, be strategic and and have connectedness. So that ability to see the big picture and also connect the dots at the same time. But one of the watch outs as a person who is strategic and connected is to understand what isn't that you aren't seeing.
Mhm.
There's an ownership. What is my blind spot?
Mhm.
And so that makes me have to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
don't get to move in this space and think I have all the information. And so it opens me up to be able to ask the questions. And the fact that I don't have to have all of that information, because if I'm really being synergistic in the way I'm bringing my team together, they have the information.
Mhm.
you know and so it's really about how I use inquiry and bring questions into a conversation so that they can contribute. And if I'm the only talking head, it's not going to be a two-way conversation, or even a multi-dimensional conversation in that way. And so the vulnerability is to be able to say, I don't need to have all the information. What
Mhm.
if we go back to your theme about belonging? what I actually need to do as a leader is to make sure I have all the right voices at the table. And so that the expertise that is needed is brought to the table, and that together we can come to a solution that is far beyond what any of us could have done on our own. And so that's the difference. I don't operate in a or lead in a method of control. I lead through empowerment. And so my team knows that I am relying on them to bring their expertise to the table. And I will even throw out my ideas and even be able to say, this might sound crazy, but this is what I'm thinking, and they'll receive that too, and we can sit on it together and come up with an idea. I don't come in and demand that my idea be the one that we execute. And
Mhm.
so it very much it makes me think of this James Baldwin quote that talks about the two-way street of love, and it's this idea that is if I am helping you see your blind spots, I'm going to help you grow, and you're doing the same for me. And
Mhm.
so that to me is what vulnerability or the invitation, I would say, to vulnerability when it comes to leadership in the workplace. But I wouldn't be honest if I wouldn't say that I find people who are reluctant to be, because we've been shaped and formed to think that knowledge and intellect are everything, and control and domination are everything for a long time.
Yeah.
And old habits die hard.
Mhm.
And so I get it. And I think that's why, honestly, I also bring grace with that vulnerability,
Goodness, yes.
to be able to understand that it might be in fits and starts, and it's going to make
Mhm.
people uncomfortable. And so, how can I be a welcoming, inviting force in these conversations too? And also, there's this um, Alan de Botton, who wrote this book called The Course of Love. He talks about the really understanding the Greek understanding of love,
Mhm. Mhm.
and this beauty of how we teach and how we are taught, and that we're less aggressive and we're more receptive to both
Mhm.
of those roles, and how important that is. And so,
Mhm.
I kind of came across those words, I think 2018 and 2019, and they struck me. And so they just remind me about how, the lesson of teaching and the openness and the vulnerability of being taught.
You have said so much that I want to unpack, but time is just, it just won't let me. There's just so much in here. But I do want to start off by saying I appreciated how you said, let me name my privilege, because too often we associate privilege with white males and think that they're the only people that have privilege. And for years, I have said, pause and think about your privilege, because we all have it. We just haven't stopped to think to name it. So
Mhm.
thank you for starting with that. And one of these days, I'm going to have you come back just so we can talk about privilege in all its contexts and facets. You mentioned strength finders. I love strength finders.
Mhm.
And when you talk about having all of the voices at the table, when I have a workshop, I usually start with a picture, and it's me leading a session, but there's one empty chair. And I always ask people, tell me what you see. They see, I see people laughing. I see mainly women. I see this. I see that. And it isn't until one person finally says, and sometimes it takes longer than others, I see an empty chair. And I'm like, right. And that empty chair should remind you, always think about whose voice is missing from around your table, right? And so when we think about strengths and the need to have other voices at the table, is to say, because we can't all have the same strengths and we're not intended to, how can I form strengths partnerships? How can I not see what I don't have as a strength, but actually as an invitation to bring Jasmine into the conversation because she has a strength that I need? That is just so powerful. And I think also when you mention blind spots, I talk about the fact that it's our backstories, bad stories we've heard, our blind spots, all of those things contribute to the organizational belief system. And so now what you're talking about is a belief system that says for so long we've led this way, thinking we were getting results. And now we have to shift this way, which is a proven way of getting results. So, Jasmine, after unpacking all that, my remaining question for you is this: how do you get leaders to even begin to shift from command and control to love and invitation and expansiveness and all of the other things that you talked about earlier in our other episodes?
It's a journey,
Mhm.
not a sprint.
Yep. With fits and starts,
Yeah.
right?
And I think it starts the relationship.
Mhm.
It starts also by respecting them enough to know that I'm not here to convince them to be something that
Right.
I think is right.
Mhm.
And that I can also just be a model and an influence of a different way,
Mhm.
and and allow that to be enough. You know, I think too often in a lot of this work that we do, that our goal is to convince somebody to get on our side, to be what we think they ought to be, and that's not freedom.
Mhm.
Freedom is allowing people to be who they are. But if we go back to that expansiveness piece, I I you don't know what might be there still waiting for you if you don't open yourself to it. And so to me, that's the beauty of the tough conversations. That's the beauty of understanding our blind spots and our own biases, that we can choose to live the lives that we live and or lead. We can inspire others to maybe see a different way, but not try to force them to do anything. I think that's the bigger thing, is that I'm not.
Mhm.
Um, I know what has transformed my own life, and I know what has transformed all of my context. I'm going to show up in every space as me fully all the time, and that may inspire others to grow and change. And that's a beautiful, wonderful thing. But it's not about being who I think they should be. And I think that's the important part of the journey.
I would agree with you. I like to say we meet people where they are.
Yep,
Yeah, and we walk alongside them on the journey for as far as they want to go.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
That's right. The only
Wow.
person you can change is yourself.
That's right. That's right. I have a very good friend who happens to be a therapist, and she says you can't control other people's teeth, their thoughts, their emotions, and actions. So all you can do is, live your best life and try and influence from that standpoint. So, wow, community. Conversation number two, another deep thinking conversation. I do hope you're thinking about what Jasmine said in terms of thinking about your own privilege and how you can use that privilege to benefit others, how your lived experiences can give you some insight and help you meet people where they are, not to convince them or cajole them, or especially not to call them out, but to call them into new knowledge, to call them into a new way of leading. Wow, Jasmine, thank you so much. Can't wait to have you back for our third conversation, a real conversation from the C-suite community with Ms. Jasmine Bellamy. She is the head merchant and culture transformer for Reebok. And if you want to hear this podcast again or our previous podcast with Jasmine, please go to my website at drnita.com. Remember to spell out the word doctor. At the top in the center, click the link that says Keeping It Real Podcast. And while you're there, check out some of my resources and my services. And please help me get in the flow, follow, like, and overshare any broadcast that helps you to reframe diversity conversations from difficult to different. Until next time, this is Dr. Nita reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.